Thank you for being here. My name is John Shaw. I'm the director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute. And thank you for attending a special event at the Varsity, our Morton-Kenney Lecture. As I'm sure all you know, this lecture series is an important part of the Institute's work, and was the late Jerome Lohr, an SIU alum, established this series in 1995 in honor of two of his favorite professors, political science professors, Ward Morton and David Kenney. As I'm sure you all know, we've had some remarkable speakers for this series, and we really feel fortunate to have, as good as it gets tonight. John Palfrey is one of the most creative and insightful and important thinkers in the United States, who also happens to run one of the most important foundations in the country. Just being with John today, I noticed that a lot of people are really, really friendly to him. I think that's one of the, I'm sure it's his charming personality, but we were talking about his job. He says, I love it except that I spend most of my time saying no to people, and that is just not much fun. In terms of format, I'm just going to briefly introduce John. We're going to converse for about 40 minutes, and then we'd like to open it up for Q&A, and would love to get some of your questions to John. So John is a native of Massachusetts. He has an undergraduate degree from Harvard, a master's degree from the University of Cambridge, and a law degree from Harvard. He's been a law professor and vice dean at Harvard Law School, and was the founding president of the board of directors of the Digital Public Library of America, which has been described as one of the most innovative ideas in the history of library science. He served on the board of the Knight Foundation for more than a decade and chaired the board for 6 years. Prior to becoming president of the MacArthur Foundation, he was the head of school at Phillips Academy in Andover for 7 years. He's the author or co-author of 10 books, which include The Connected Parent, an expert guide to parenting in a digital world, Safe Spaces, Brave Spaces, Diversity and Free Expression in Education, Born Digital, How Children Grow Up in a Digital Age. And he has a new book coming out later this year or early next year called Wired Wisdom, about how adults, people of our age, learn through technology. So I'm eager to kind of pick his mind on that. So let me just go over and have a conversation with John, and then we will open it up to questions in a little bit. So thank you so much. Well, John, so many pieces of your background are interesting. You're the great-grandson of Theodore Roosevelt,
Yep.
Among other things. But I wanted to touch on something, in terms of your career, because here you were at Harvard Law School, you have this amazing career, and then you choose to become the head of school at Andover. What were you thinking? And what do your colleagues at Harvard Law say? What are you doing, John? Or talk about that if you want.
That's a funny place to start. Let me just say, first of all, how pleased I am to be here and the honor of being the Morton-Kenney Lecture participant with you tonight. When we were talking about this, we thought it might be more fun to do it as a chat as opposed to one person standing at a lectern. So thank you for being up for that as the lecture format. Let me just say, can you hear me okay in the back? It's okay. And how thrilled I am to be here. I'm here with my colleague Kristen Mack, Vice President of MacArthur Foundation, and it was just an incredibly fun day to be up at SIU. We got to see some of the team at WSIU and supporters of the organization. We got to sit with some students who were studying journalism and some of the faculty, and of course to be at the Institute was just a great day. So thank you for treating us to that here in Carbondale. Scrolling back to this moment, I guess I wasn't thinking we were going to do a career chat, but it's kind of fun anyway. It was I had been, as John described, an academic and was at Harvard Law School. And Harvard Law School is a little bit, it's a wonderful place. It has about 100 full-time faculty, and some people describe it as 100 CEOs. And once you become a professor at Harvard Law School and you've got tenure, and my colleagues would describe it as being sort of on the top of Mount Olympus, because you've got this job and you can do it for the rest of your life, and why would you want to do something else? And I was on the younger side at this moment. I was in my 30s, and I had just written this book called Born Digital. I was studying young people and how they were learning differently, growing up differently in a digital age. This was kind of 2006, 2008, in that era. sort of out of the blue, a search firm came to me and said, would you be interested in becoming head of Andover? And I said, that's so nice, but no. My wife loves living in Cambridge. I love living here. My kids are happy. I've got a great job. I've got tenure. Like, no, thank you. And you know how this goes sometimes. They kind of call back and they try a few times and, all right, I'll talk to you and that kind of thing. And, it was just sort of a fascinating thing. I waded into it and it seemed interesting. And part of it really was the chance to be with young people at a particularly important time in their lives, from 13 to 18. And Andover as a place, it's an interesting school. It's a need-blind institution, so it's got kids from all over the world, about 100 different countries, just fascinating. And I thought I could have this front row seat with young people, really remarkable young people at this key point in their life. And instead of just studying young people in technology, I'd be kind of with them and teaching them and so forth. And so against all the odds, we ended up making this choice. But it's funny that you described the what did your colleagues think. My colleagues were baffled that I would leave a tenure job at Harvard Law School for this and being vice dean. And one of them, who I did not know well, was an economist. And maybe we had said hi in the hall a half dozen times, but not much more than that. I hadn't studied with him as a student. I hadn't done law and economics. He really was troubled by this. It was puzzling. He had asked me into his office. I sort of felt like a school child going into the principal's office, and I remember his office was way up top in the fanciest of the faculty office buildings, and I went up there, and he just said, John, you just have to tell me, like, why in the world are you doing this? He said, I'm an economist. Like, how much are they paying you? He just thought it was a major pay raise that I was getting, and I actually didn't even know. Like, it was one of those things where that hasn't motivated me in my career. And, I started to fumble through this fulfillment and working with kids. It's like, no, how much are they paying you? I have to know. Anyway, that was it was puzzling, I think, to take this weird career move, but it was wonderful in this way.
And I've seen you in a couple interviews talk about just the ritual of gathering with the whole school. Was it daily or weekly? But there was sort of a chapel in which all the students would flock to the main place, and then you would go and bestow your wisdom. Talk about that challenge.
There are many things that I think back on in that time of being a head of school, and if anybody here is a high school principal or any kind of job like that, or university president or whatever, this is a hard time to be leading an academic institution, and there are parts of it I do not miss. I saw some really wonderful parenting and some really awful parenting, et cetera, et cetera. But the one thing that I really just sort of miss on a daily basis, and I actually do have, I think, the best job in the world right now, but I really do miss that moment when, and you can imagine it's the fall, and New England is a little like Southern Illinois with beautiful leaves turning and so forth, and weather like this, and the bell starts tolling at about 10:15 a.m., and the students have had already a couple classes, and they've had their breakfast, and they start just making their way toward this chapel in the middle of the morning and streaming in from all these parts of life, and then I walk in amidst them, as they're coming in, and that was heaven. I mean, just an incredible ability to be able to sit with 1,100 kids, and it was less me bestowing my wisdom. I actually did that very rarely, but mostly we would have, as you do, host other people coming in, and I was just saying, we were able to invite Jane Goodall, and she would come, and we invited Jeb Bush, and he came, and you could really have people from all over, all walks of life, and different dynamics, and really have with students a conversation about the most important issues of the day, and that was a wonderful thing to be able to do, and I think we do it too little. But I just credit the varsity. I credit all of you. That's what you're doing tonight, right? Nobody has paid you to come in this space or it's about coming together as a community, and in a place like that we were able to do it much as you can do it here in Carbondale.
Well, let's talk about moving to the greatest job in the world at the MacArthur Foundation in 2019. And, there's a lot of foundations in the world. Tell us a little bit about where MacArthur fits in the foundation foundation community.
There are more than I thought, actually. Does anybody have a guess how many foundations there are in the world, in the United States, just like ballpark? 2,000. 2,000 is a great guess. So I was thinking, I learned this when I was working on a book about libraries called Bibliotech. There are about 15,000 libraries in the United States. That's about the same number of Starbucks, by the way. So I was thinking, all right, if you think about every community foundation, every family foundation, it's probably a few thousand. And John and my friend Kristen are on the board of Forefront, which is the organization that organizes foundations and nonprofits here in Illinois. It's about 125,000 foundations in America. So So if you're raising money, there are more sources of money out there than you think, put it that way. The corresponding number, and that this goes to all the no's that we get to say, is the number of nonprofits. I won't make you guess, but it's about 1.5 million nonprofits in America, NGOs. So every university, every school, the varsity, I suspect, would be in that list, and so forth. And most of them we would love to give a grant to. And actually, the MacArthur Fellows Program, are the Genius Awards. That's just individuals. So we give out awards to 25 individuals, roughly speaking, every year. Anyway, it is just a bigger world than I thought it was, and understood it to be. And MacArthur is, once upon a time, it was one of the biggest in the country. When Mr. and Mrs. MacArthur passed on and left the foundation, it really started making grants in 1978. Mr. MacArthur was the third wealthiest person in America when he passed in the late 70s, and he left $1 billion to this foundation. And what's happened by leaving the money in a foundation as opposed to his family or in taxes and otherwise, is it has grown today to $8.8 billion. And during that period, we've also given away $8 billion. So it is sort of the magic of the stock market. If you had that much in your retirement account, you would be lucky to have it have grown. But we've also been able to give away more than 5% per year, which is what we do. So it is a big foundation. It's certainly the biggest in Chicago and probably the biggest in Illinois, I'm guessing. I think that's safe to say. But relative to others, now think about what Mr. Gates has, what Mr. Buffett has. Those foundations are way bigger than what we have. So we are now, once upon a time, we were in the top 10 or 12 in the country, and we're now fairly, further down in the depth chart. Maybe we're in the 20s. But I think in part because of the Fellows Program, in part because of how well MacArthur is known in various fields, it is one of the better known. And so we do get lots of opportunities to partner and to give grants, which is amazing. And by no means am I complaining about not being able to give a grant to everybody who we would love to. But it is tricky because we operate also in Nigeria and in India and in the US, and we give out about 400 grants a year. And so if you think about sort of the scale of the need and the opportunity that's out there, we don't make that many grants. So you just really have to choose carefully. I'm worried if I'm the scratchy one there. Let's see if I can improve my posture or something and scratch less. So anyway, it's an amazing opportunity, and the family did not give many directions in terms of what to give the money for. So in some ways, we can really go anywhere in a way as a foundation.
We had a virtual event with Louise Richardson, who's a friend of yours. Yeah, a friend of yours at the Carnegie Corporation of New York. Yeah. Exactly. And she was talking about her job. She said, my job consists of this. She said, I spend about half of my day hearing about the hardest problem in the world. Yeah. The other half hearing really smart, creative people with amazing ideas, and all of my day trying to figure out how to bring these two groups together.
Exactly, yeah.
So how do you go about thinking about where you put the resources? I mean, what is the sort of the kind of thought that's in your head about what guides your decision making? So
I'm going to back up a little bit to the Andover story to get to this, which is that one of the reasons that I took that job was that the motto of Andover is non sibi, or not for self. And I thought if my job could be to get up every day and walk across the street to the head of school's office and work on not for self as that, what a wonderful thing to be able to impart. That's what I'm getting paid to do. And the same thing's true with MacArthur, which has a wonderful mission statement, which is to make the world more just, verdant, and peaceful. So who wouldn't like a job where someone pays you to give away their money to make the world more just, verdant, and peaceful? So that's a pretty good job description, right? It turns out the only hard part about it really is discerning between which of the problems to take on and which not to take on, and then discerning between which of the wonderful people out there you could give the money to and the ones you won't, right? That's the only challenge. So we do a number of different things in order to try to work this out. We have a team that does new work exploration. So we are sort of actively looking for the kinds of work, the kinds of problems that philanthropy is going to be best suited to work on. And most problems we don't take on. So I would love to say, I'm going to use an example of something we don't do. We don't invest that heavily in health, as an example. Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is a health-oriented foundation. MacArthur, we will give money to a researcher through our fellows program who's doing breakthrough cancer science. So Dr. Funmi Alapade on our board is an amazing oncologist who figured out some of the ways in which women in Africa get particular cancers and how to treat them. She's amazing. So it's not that we don't support some people in the field, but we don't have a program that works on cancer research, as an example. But of course, that would be a wonderful thing to do. So what we've really tried to do is to figure out what are the things that we're really good at, what are the problems in the world, and then how can we resource those who have the best ideas to address those problems. That's I think, in some ways, the equation we're after.
Okay. Now, one category of programs are called enduring commitments. And the two that I've read about, of course, Chicago and then journalism. Let's talk for a second about like your enduring commitment to Chicago. I know you're proudly based there as well as other locations, but what is MacArthur's enduring commitment to Chicago?
Yeah, so we've tried to divide our programs in such a way that conveys to the field what we're trying to accomplish and for how long we're going to do it. So it is a reasonable knock on philanthropy to say, you flit in and out from different things. No, MacArthur actually tries to do things over a relatively long period of time. Kristen and I were just in Nigeria celebrating our 30 years there. We try to work on a longer time scale because the problems we're taking on, climate change, international peace, these are problems that take very long, probably will never be solved, and some peace may never be solved, as an example. So there's certain things that we treat as enduring. And the two that are stated enduring long-term commitments, one is to our home city of Chicago. So the MacArthur family made their money there. It was Bankers Life and Trust was the company that they made their money through. And so giving back to the city is critically important. So organizations like the Varsity based in Chicago, which do arts and culture, would be an example of something that we've supported for a long time. There are many, many, many arts and culture organizations that we focused on, and we try to do that with equity at its core. So we try to make sure that organizations that have not gotten supported, particularly on the south and west sides of Chicago, get more than their fair share these days of support because they've been so under-resourced, as an example. We're trying to help close the racial and ethnic wealth gap that is in Chicago. We're trying to revitalize communities that have been blighted by gun violence and underinvestment in schools, as an example. So those are commitments that we know we can't just solve with 1 year of grant making. This is going to have to be over decades and probably generations of investment. And in that case, I like to think of what we're doing on our best days as planting the tiny acorns that will grow into the mighty oaks under whose shade we may not sit, but our grandkids may. That's where I think philanthropy can, in fact, in some ways be best in terms of long-term investment. And then in journalism and media, we have been really from the get-go an investor in NPR, in PBS. Public media is something that we don't invest in enough in America. You are lucky to have WSIU here, absolutely blessed to have strong institutions here. And it's because people like you volunteer. You step up, you write checks, you carry the tote bags, you do the work, you get on I think it might be a pledge drive right now at WSIU, by the way. Kristen and I work hard on WBZ in our neighborhood and WTTW. So MacArthur has just been super steady in making those grants. I guess if they went really off the rails, we could stop investing in public media. But what we found is it just does require that kind of long-term investment. And if we and others don't do it, it's going to be problematic. So enduring commitments are ones where we hope to be very long-term partners. We hope very much to invest in a way that allows organizations to make those investments, take the risks that they need to over a long time, so they're not spending all their time fundraising. So those are two types of programs that we've invested in as enduring commitments.
Well, John, a second category, which I guess in some ways is sort of the opposite, is called big bets. Not the opposite, a different approach, which is having a big investment over a limited period of time in a fairly specific area. Although still, it's nuclear security, climate, et cetera. So talk about the concept of big bets.
Yeah, so big bets are another type in our portfolio. So if an enduring commitment is really long, slow, committed capital, a big bet is saying for a period of time, and we are going to tell you we're ending it. So we're starting it and we are going to end it. People complain when we end things, but we're just telling you this is how long it's going to go. We're going to, in that case, identify a problem and we're going to favor a solution. So with the enduring commitments, we tend to just give people unrestricted money and basically just bet on people who have great ideas and are really creative. With the big bet, it's a little different. So I'm going to start with climate just because it's been our largest one. In that particular case, we said we know that during this period of time, and this is, let's call it 2016 to 2026, something like that, we need to slow the rate of global warming. And if we don't do it now, it's going to have long-term repercussions for the planet, right? I think most of us, unless you're really a climate denier, you'd agree with that mild statement. And we've agreed that actually having the degree of change be below 2 degrees above the pre-industrial levels would be a good, safe place to end. So that's the North Star. We realize that even with our money, we can't get there. But we can contribute to that, and we can partner with others to do that. And we can do it with a sense of equity. So we think about who's at the table, who's affected by this. We know that some communities are harder hit and more dangerously affected. So we can tip the scales a little bit in favor of disinvested communities with our money. So in that case, we decided to invest in that big bet over this period of time through 2026 in decarbonization as one strategy. So how do we invest in, an example would be the Beyond Coal campaign. So reducing the commitment to using coal to provide energy for the planet, and then invest in the transition, which is some people are going to lose their job in the coal mines. They need another job. How can we make that a just transition? How do we include everybody in that next economy? So those kinds of investments are, tens of millions of dollars in organizations and in strategies that hopefully will help us as a society reduce the extent to which we need fossil fuels, and then invest in the kinds of jobs that are going to be the cleaner jobs for those who will be harmed, let's say in Appalachia as an example, when those coal mines end up closing. So that would be an example of a strategy. Doesn't mean we're not going to be in the conservation business or the environment business or the climate business after that, but that strategy is a 10-year commitment to try to help with that decarbonization effort and that equity effort.
Another initiative I thought is really interesting is called 100 and Change.
Yes.
This is 100 million we're talking about. Talk about that.
It's so fun. Yeah. So as part of this thinking about big bets, we realize that in philanthropy, typically the grants are smaller. So in most of philanthropy, I don't know, the philanthropy that you and I might do, if we give $100 to a theater that we support, or you might give $1,000 to a public radio station that you love, as an example. And maybe if you come to your typical community foundation, if you got $100,000, that would get you pretty far up on that wall, that donor wall, right? So we thought, what if we changed the dynamic and we said, we're going to put $100 million out there in a single award? Would that change the way people thought about these problems and what was possible? In philanthropy, there haven't been very many $100 million awards. Now, since we started doing it, there are more. And you see some people giving that kind of money even to their universities. I don't know if SIU has had that level gift, but the Harvards and the Stanfords have had $100 million gifts. That changes, again, the scale that is possible, what you can do. And again, we're taking on things like climate and nuclear security. So we're talking about big problems. So we've now done this. We're in our third time doing it. We've done it twice, and it's now out for a third time. We've said to anybody in the world, you can come up with a problem and a solution, and we'll give you $100 million to try to solve it. So I'll tell you, do I have time to tell you about the first two? The number of applicants is 900 to 1,000 applications of people saying, if you gave us $100 million, we could do blank. And the fun part is that because as I mentioned, the MacArthur family, it's apocryphal I think, but they said, we made the money, you fellas figure out how to spend it. So that's how much of a constraint that we have. So we really can give it to anybody, anywhere in the world for any problem. So people have proposed, there are a lot of actually health ones, but lots of things all over the world. You could imagine someone saying, mosquito-borne illness is really bad in this part of the world. We could solve it for $100 million. That's one we got, so forth. Anyway, the two that we gave money to, the first one was Sesame Street, and the IRC came to us and said, there are 7 million people who are leaving Syria in the middle of this civil war. 7 million people also being displaced within Syria, and many, many of them, probably a majority, are young people. And they are not going to have an education of the sort that you would hope when they were being displaced, because they're going to end up in refugee camps, they're going to end up probably mobile for periods of time and so forth. So they said, if we could make an Arabic language Sesame Street, it would affect the social and emotional learning of millions of young people, and it would change the trajectory of their lives forever. And we're going to team up with the International Rescue Committee, which does refugee support. So we're going to link the learning that they're going to get from this television program in Arabic to the learning that's happening in the places to which they've been displaced. And the world of development, sort of economics and support for refugees, has never focused on social and emotional learning for children. So we're going to try to change that field so the IRCs and others start building this into their programming as young people get displaced more and more around the world. And wouldn't you know it, they've been wildly successful. They, with $100 million, it's now done basically after 5 or 6 years, they set out to educate something on the order of 5 million kids. They blew way past it. And it turned out in the Arabic speaking world, do you know what the #1 television program was for Arabic speaking children around the world? It turned out to be Tom and Jerry. If you think about it, it's nonverbal. It's a little cat chasing a mouse, right? Thomas the Tank Engine was way up there. SpongeBob was way up there. But they're doing, American-produced, maybe British, bless you, produced programs, mostly not with language, whatever. And this Ahlan Sim Sim, which is the Arabic language version of Sesame Street, vaulted up into 3rd place. And it has not displaced Tom and Jerry or SpongeBob, I don't think. But it's very close, and it's giving it a run for its money. And Kristen and I got to travel. It was wonderful, amazing to be in the Jordanian camps, for instance, and communities where the students were. And they're in with other Jordanian kids and Egyptian kids and other kids, and they're all watching the same program. And then they talk about the characters, and they talk about it with their teacher. And it is, I think, changing the way that they're going to learn through their life. So that's #1, kind of amazing. The one that we have done more recently, someone came to us called Community Solutions, and the woman who runs it's named Roseanne Hegarty. She was a MacArthur Fellow from about 20 years ago, and she said, we believe that homelessness, at least in most communities in America, can be ended. We do not have to accept homelessness in America. And she said, if you give us $100 million, we can end homelessness in 75 communities in America. We thought that was a pretty good pitch, so we gave her $100 million. She's aiming to do more than 100 now. I think they're going for a larger number of communities. It's not going to work in the big cities like Chicago and LA and New York. It doesn't aim for, but in smaller communities, it is possible, if we organize ourselves better, to have functional zero homelessness. So we can have a bed for every human, and that's what she's working on. So we're aiming for things that are really audacious, and where only with $100 million could you solve it over, say, something like 5 years. So anyway, that's the game plan, and we'll see. It's out now. There's 100 and change is available for application at the moment, and we'll see what gets it for the 3rd round.
John, you've mentioned the MacArthur Fellows, the Genius Awards. They get a lot of press. They're, $800,000, I guess, for 4 or 5 years.
5 years, yep, unrestricted.
And I was looking at your website, and you're describing what you hope to accomplish. And there's a phrase that I found interesting. You said, this is not a Lifetime Achievement Award. Yeah. So what is it then? What are you hoping to do with these Genius grants?
The unofficial way to describe it is, I think about it as enablement. So by enablement, I mean, what can we enable that otherwise would not be possible but for these incredibly creative people having this amount of freedom that this money and this award can give them. So if we can give somebody who has not applied for it, who's doing incredibly interesting work at the edges of science or the edges of art or in some field that has not been highlighted in this way, if they have the freedom that comes with unexpectedly getting a call from one of us in September and saying, we would love you to be a MacArthur Fellow. No one has yet turned us down in 4 years of that offer. We're going to give you $800,000, no reporting requirement, no application. You can do anything you want with it over 5 years. That we will enable creativity that we cannot imagine. And what's wonderful about it in some ways is actually the humility of this, is saying over that period of time, we don't know what art this amazing artist is going to make. We do not know what science they're going to develop in a particular way, but we do know that if we do this, they're going to all of a sudden get some NSF grants. all of a sudden some graduate students are really going to be psyched to work with them. All of a sudden the idea that they have is going to get some traction in the field where they've been ignored for too long. And very often this is a woman of color in a field that is dominated by white men, or it is someone who has been on the outskirts of a field where they have not been respected by their institution or otherwise. But the work is amazing, and their peers are telling us this is absolutely the breakthrough work. And that enablement of this award really does make a big difference. So I'll give you just one example, one example of very many. Do you all know Brian Stevenson? There was a movie, he wrote a book called Just Mercy. There's been a movie about him. He now runs an organization called the Equal Justice Initiative. Brian's an amazing lawyer, and he was, at the time of his award, he was doing work in the American South, and he was in a state in which the work that he was doing, civil rights work and trying to support reform of the criminal justice system, it was being defunded. And the work that he was doing representing clients who couldn't pay him had just been defunded. And the call that came to him that September literally stopped him from having to close the doors of that original organization, the EJI. And so we had no idea, of course, that when we were giving this award to Brian Stevenson, that it was literally allowing him to continue that work. But it was at a moment where there was not another source of support. What he was doing was hugely important. And if any of you have had the chance to go to Montgomery, Alabama, to see the EJI, to see the Legacy Museum, to see what he has done to transform a community, a state, the cases he has brought to the Supreme Court that have literally changed the way in which we think about criminal justice, I mean, he has done so much work that nobody could possibly have anticipated that with the grant. It's enabling this. So it's not the Lifetime Achievement Award for Brian Stevenson at the end of his, he's in his 70s and he's, done all this stuff and we're putting him on, giving him a medal. No, it's to say, what could you do? What could you do with this idea, this kernel of genius that you have if it's got this kind of support?
Wow. Let's talk about something you've talked about a lot today, press forward. We've been talking, you and I have been talking about this, just the really crisis in America with the closing of news organizations in communities. Huge parts of the country have virtually no local news. Talk about the impetus to try to address this problem and what you're trying to achieve, you and the Coalition of the Enthusiastic, yes. Isn't it?
Exactly, yeah. So this story goes in a way to our way of trying to be a learning organization. So with the journalism and media work that we described as an enduring commitment, even though it's something we're going to keep doing, we figure every couple of years we should review it, because you think about it, nobody else is really reviewing our work, so we need to review it ourselves or have somebody review it. And what we found when we reviewed this journalism work was people said, by the way, giving money to NPR is a good idea, and you better keep doing it because we need it. But the reviewers also said there's this other problem that you're actually not investing in, which is there is a crisis in America, which is in local news. And in particular, they pointed out to us that in America we were losing 2 newspapers a week. We're failing. It is now 2.5 newspapers a week that are failing. And we now know that between 1/4 and 1/3 of America is effectively a news desert. Nobody is covering the town councils or the city councils. Nobody is covering the school boards. They just are literally not being covered by local reporters. I understand that the largest of the local papers here used to have 10 reporters, now has 2 as an example. I'm delighted that the Daily Egyptian still exists on the campus here. That is an amazing thing that the students are doing, and we got to meet with the managing editor today, who's terrific, Lily. So there are bright spots, but it is a declining industry. Basically, nobody makes money. It used to be a great business. It's now, at best, a break-even business, probably a losing business in every community. And so we were called out, in a sense, by our own review that said, you're doing this really important work, supporting ProPublica nationally and supporting NPR and Sundance and these great things we've been doing, and you should keep doing it, but you also need to focus on this local news problem. So then we looked at how much money we had. And we said, even if we stopped doing this and that, the amount of money that we'd have, which is in the hundreds of millions of dollars, would not be enough across America to solve this really big problem. So we thought to ourselves, what could we do to be different than just making a big bet and investing our own money, which is going to be in the hundreds of billions, but not the billions that are needed for this problem. We said, what if we asked our friends in other foundations to do something together? Now, if you know anything about philanthropy, this is not typically how it goes. Usually, we like to have the control and just, our big egos and make our good decisions and, be praised for the great decisions we made. We typically don't pool the money, we don't put it together, we don't partner that much. But we said, what if we tried it differently and not have a coalition of the willing, because that seems too passive. We want the coalition of the enthusiastic. We want people who really want to help address this crisis in American democracy, which I believe it is. Because I think if we lose all of the local coverage in every community in America, I just think people who want to take advantage of our governments, people who are don't have the best civic interest, are going to be able to take advantage of that. I think our community cohesion will decline. I just think we hold ourselves accountable through the power of the press, and if we don't have it, it's going to be problematic. So we passed the hat around some foundations, and we initially had about 3 partners, and then we got to 22 partners last fall, and we launched with $500 million, so that was good, over 5 years. And today we have 65 partners who are foundations and families who are investing in this together. We're aiming for a 50-state effort. We right now have 30 chapters around the country. They range from Press Forward Alaska, so we have statewide chapters in Alaska, Press Forward Wyoming. We have 2 here in Illinois right now, Press Forward Chicago and Press Forward Springfield. Kristen and I and a few others, we've been traveling with Judy Woodruff and a bunch of other great heroes. Charles Below travels with us. We've been on what we call our whistle-stop tour around America. And the idea is to try to encourage every community to step up and say, we are going to treat local news like supporting alma mater, like supporting our schools, like supporting arts and culture, like supporting the symphony or the jazz club that we give our money to. We're going to add local news to that. And we as a national foundation are going to seed it. We're putting money in. And we're asking community foundations to step up, and the Community Foundation of Land of Lincoln, as an example, has stepped up with 7 figures of their own capital committed to an endowment to support coverage in Springfield of course, importantly, the state capital, but also the region. We are partnering with them with $1 million that we put in there. In Chicago, we've got about $10 million supported by the Community Foundation, which is the Chicago Community Trust, and about 10 others. So we're traveling around trying to convince people that you need to support local news. It needs to be a philanthropic priority. Big philanthropies can help, but we can't fund everywhere. There are just too many parts of America for us to do it. So we can't really fund Vermont, but we can fund the Community Foundation, the State Community Foundation in Vermont, to set up a Press Forward, which they've done. And we can seed that, we can support that, we can network those. And what's going to work in Vermont may well help inform, in a rural area, what's happening in Southern Illinois. And what's happening here may well inform some of what happens in Wyoming. It probably isn't the same thing that's going to work in Chicago or LA, but it might well be something that's an idea that's going to travel and help. So our hope is that over the next several years, we're going to have chapters that cover much of the United States, hopefully in 50 states. We have now given out about $100 million of that commitment as initial grants, and we're not going to stop, certainly at $500 million, and I'd hope to get to $1 billion.
John, you tell a story, I think you told us in the Atlantic, to just make it really kind of tangible, when you were at Andover, where there was a local town newspaper that kept a very close eye on Phillips Academy, and
sure did. They were irritating.
They challenged, lots of things, and they would buttonhole you and make your life miserable occasionally. And then they sort of dropped off the map, and you were sad about that. Tell the story of the local newspaper there, and why it's consequential.
I surprised myself by being sad about it, because it wasn't a thorn in my side. In this little school, boarding school, was, it was a 25,000 person town. It was the biggest employer. Raytheon was there too, but we were probably the biggest employer in the town. We're right in the center of the town. The town is often called Andover, and the school is often called Andover, so it's kind of synonymous. And the Andover Townsman was a weekly paper, and I understand the Daily Egyptian is now a weekly paper, but not dissimilar at all from this. And at the time, it had an editor. It was a very thoughtful guy, and he had a couple reporters, and they covered really well the town meeting, and they covered the town manager, and it was, and the local sports. the kinds of things that bring people together. It actually had 2 sections when I got there, and the thing that they got under my skin about was we were a wealthy school and in a town. They wanted more of us because we weren't paying property taxes, as you don't as a nonprofit. We were doing a payment in lieu of paying some taxes, which is often called a pilot payment in lieu of taxes, and we were paying more than any other boarding school. We were paying more than there actually was a college in the town that was Merrimack College. We paid way more than them, but they were always just on us, and so every year the town would put out this flyer that basically was like Phillips Academy should pay more and pay enough and whatever. We were always on the cover, and it was irritating, and the press, the newspaper would always put it on the front like you should pay more. And I went to the trustees and said we need to do a long-term 10-year commitment. We're going to pay more and whatever. And so we did this 10-year thing. We really dig deep. We were like 5 times bigger than any other place was across the state, and the paper still ran this thing saying we weren't paying enough. It was one of those things. It was like there was no winning. But then at the end of my time, 7 years later, I announced that I was leaving to move to Chicago and join the MacArthur Foundation. And I got an email, and it was from a reporter from the newspaper. And this reporter was, and with respect, this reporter had graduated from college a few months before. She was 22. And she said, I'd love to do a profile on you. It's kind of your goodbye profile. And it had been before that the editor was this guy, I don't know, sort of a journeyman reporter, experienced guy. He would walk up to my office and just grab a coffee, and I would yell at him for the thing he wrote. But I always read it, and we always talked, and it was always good. He was long gone. And there was one person, was this 22-year-old working for this paper, and she was based in the next city over, and we'd never met. And she came up the hill to my office, and she sat there, and we met each other for the first time, and then she interviewed me for this goodbye profile. It was fine profile. I have no complaints. A little wistful, but it just was the sense of decline that this 22-year-old was all that was left. It was the person who was going to write this, and she wrote all the stories every week. And honestly, she wasn't very good. I looked her up recently because when I was doing this Atlantic article, I wanted to make sure. She left journalism after a year or two. I mean, it was just like something she was doing after college. Perfectly good writer, perfectly able. But the idea that was what was in this 25,000 person, well-known New England town, was the only person holding to account those of us in power. It just struck me that was a painful decline, and I can't imagine that now, whatever it is, 6 years later, that it's any stronger.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to turn it over to you for some questions. But tell us about the new book you have coming up, because I think it might be of particular interest to people in this audience.
I will make a deal with you, John. Are you ready for the deal? Which is, I'll talk about my book if you will talk about the book that you have coming out today.
Okay.
Do you want to go first? Okay. So this is the deal that I get by doing a fireside chat instead of being the lecture at the podium. And this actually, there is a little bit of a MacArthur story to it. I had the book that I wrote about a decade or so ago called Born Digital was about how kids learn in a digital era. When I was starting this job, I really wanted to understand what had the MacArthur family wanted us to give the money for, because I thought this apocryphal story couldn't be true. We made the money, you fellas spent, that can't really be true. Sort of is true. But I went and I pulled the original charter for the foundation from the late 60s, like what they had filed with the state of Illinois when they were giving this money. And they put 2 things in it. They said preventing government waste. I guess that was the time when people were spending like $75 on a hammer in government, and he really didn't want to pay for that, so that was fine. But the other was to support the interests of retired persons and just like pay attention to older people. So I thought what would be fun would be to do a version of the book I had done about how young people learn with technology, to say how are older people learning and using technology. And it turned out no one had written a book on this, and I have parents who are turning 80, and they need some help with technology. I think those of us who are younger people with older people in our lives, I love my parents, but they get really frustrated with technology, and it's really important for us to help. And it turns out that younger people helping makes a big difference. And most of the time we offer to help, we pretend like we're helping, and then we don't help, and it really causes a problem. And then older people end up going to their peers, and if their peers won't help, then they just check out and they stop doing it, and it causes people to not use the tools that could be helpful. Anyway, so we've done a research project with a partner, a woman named Esther Hargitay. We did a big set of surveys. So we have a book coming out called Wired Wisdom. How to Age Better Online. It's coming out from University of Chicago Press in the coming year. It is done, but in the weird world of publishing, like we finished in August, it's coming out next June. Go figure. Anyway, but I'm really excited about the fact that we're able, in a way, just to hold up the interest of older adults and to say technologies are largely designed by very young people, like in their 20s, for other young people, and not particularly thinking about older people. And yet, people over 60, which is the definition in the World Health Organization for older adults, people over 60 or older still than that, all of banking, all of health information, so much of social life, it is mediated by these technologies now. So I think we need to do a much better job than we do today thinking about these skills and the tools for older adults in technology.
Do you have some suggestions as to how they can become more adept in the digital world?
Sure, we have lots of suggestions, but the suggestions are in part also for younger people to say, how do we help? So from the perspective, if we're a younger person in thinking about the older people in our lives, what are the kinds of support that are most likely to be helpful? So that's the kind of thing we've studied. Certainly, we encourage older adults, and we have a number of tips. How to work with your library, how to work with the kinds of institutions. We were talking about the learning and retirement programs that are amazing. I learned a lot about the OLLI programs. Anybody know about the Osher learning programs? Kind of amazing network of learning opportunities for older adults. There really are great resources that I think too few people know about. So we try to highlight those very positive things that we found out there. And we also point to public policy and other things that we ought to do differently and provide more support for older adults.
And then it'll be coming out next year then?
And that comes out, yes, it is available for pre-order, it's true, from University of Chicago Press, and it will be out in June. Yeah, absolutely.
So when your book comes out, you and I will do a joint reading.
That will be so fun. That'll be so good. All right, how about your book? It comes out today, right?
It comes out today,
Happy
yeah.
Pub Day, that's
Thank
exciting.
you. Well, I'll just say a word or two. I mean, it's a book about a diplomat I've known for 20 years who is Sweden's ambassador to the United States. That's how I first met him. And he's, sort of this remarkable James Bond type of character, speaks 5 languages, has negotiated with Saddam Hussein, traveled the world, and just try to chronicle what he's learned about diplomacy and the lessons he's learned on statesmanship. And there's just lots of one of his little pet theories, and John and I were joking about this earlier, is that he says one of the keys to diplomacy is the art of the 45-second conversation. And the point is, he says oftentimes, he'd be hosting a big reception for 100 people, and he needed to talk to everyone, but he couldn't go off in the corner and spend 10 minutes. So he sort of developed this skill of having these meaningful conversations in a minute or less, and part of it too is he was this guy he's very very socially adept, but before a party he would spend half an hour, 45 minutes preparing for a party, going through the guest list and finding out and just reminding himself, okay, when did I see this person last? What are we working on some things together? When will I see him again? And just this, so I guess one of the overarching themes is just this approach to professionalism of just being incredibly thorough and very, very exacting. But also there's just kind of a fun, buoyant spirit of him. He's now 84 and he's the most optimistic person in the room. And he's just, just a really, really delightful person. So this book was done through Zoom interviews. That was sort of in some sense a COVID interview. He's in Stockholm, so we had about 15 or 16 interviews, and he's eager to come to the United States and go on book tour with me.
That's so cool.
So that should be fun.
And this is your second book about him. So
Yeah.
you must really think this guy is good.
I do,
That's
yeah.
impressive. What's the name? Yeah, what's the name of the book? I
called
was
The
going
Edu-
there too.
It's called The Education of a Statesman, and it's out by Rowman and Littlefield.
And pronounce his name properly.
Jan
for us.
Eliasson.
Jan Eliasson.
Yeah,
Jan
yeah.
Eliasson, Education of a Statesman. All right, get it. You heard it here first.
Okay, and with that very awkward...
No, it's not awkward.
Let's go to your questions to one of the leaders in philanthropy.
We're going to leave it to your good judgment. Yeah, please.
First,
All right.
and then please raise your hand. Tell us what your favorite grant has been.
Oh, man! That is, I have 2 children. That's like saying, do you prefer your daughter or your son? I love both Jack and Emmy. That is such a good question. Okay, so I'm going to give an example of a grant that I absolutely should not, because it actually was sort of off strategy. And one of the difficulties of this job is making grants that are on strategy is necessary because there are so many different things, but just sometimes something just pulls on your heart and you have to do it. So this one relates in a way to our Chicago work. That's probably technically where it fits. But a few years ago, do you remember when the United States pulled out of Afghanistan? And it was badly done. I love our country, but it was not well done. And one of the things that occurred was that a large number of young women no longer could study because the Taliban had taken over. And on the order of, and Kristen, you may correct me, but it was between 100 and 200 young women came to an Army base in the upper Midwest. And I think it was 130 students, something like that. These are young women on a plane, are evacuated from Afghanistan and come to the US and are brought to an Army base. Hard to imagine, but they're college-age students, 17 to 25, something like that. And the job of the United States was to figure out how to educate these young women. And the call went out among those of us who care about these things. We are not particularly an immigration funder. This is why it's not really, there wasn't a program to go to. Different people were trying to figure out how to provide support for these young women. So they don't know anybody, they do not speak English by and large, they don't have a school to enroll in, they all want to study. And various universities raised their hand. Arizona State University, I don't know why, but they're amazing. And they raised their hand, well, take 30, or I don't know what, some number. My alma mater and the place I taught for a long time, Harvard, said, we can't do it. They're not ready for Harvard, or whatever they said. Anyway, sorry, just what they have a great Scholars at Risk program, but it's very small. University of Chicago, 0. Northwestern, 0. All great places, 0. I do not know if SIU or other places did, but I ended up passing the hat with some friends around Chicago. One university raised its hand and said, actually 2, but one made a good offer, the other one gave a lousy offer. One university said, we will take 10, just bring them. Not a condition, not here's what we'll do for them, just bring them. And it turned out, does anybody know what university did this or would do this in Chicago? DePaul. Oh my word, yes, you got it, exactly. Vincentians. St. Vincent de Paul believed in educating people. No questions. Muslim, didn't matter. Bring them. We teach them, we will, and they just said, bring 10 kids. It was the most amazing thing, and we and others have been funding these students and their education. And DePaul said, not only will we take them for 4 years, we're going to take them for 5 years because they're going to need a year to learn English. And not only are we going to educate them, we're going to give them housing, we're going to give them access to a summer job, we're going to give them winter coats, we're going to give them room and board, like everything. And it just was stunning to me that Chicago has a lot of great colleges and universities. One university did this. And they did not do it saying, and if MacArthur pays. Now, you get the point. But I just thought that that was one of the most powerful things. And there's now 11 students in this cohort. They are now 3 years, something like that, into their studies, doing awesome. They've added one student. If you are interested, we have been helpful to one of the families. 6 family members arrived through welcome.us, if you know this program, just arrived this month evacuating their family members so that they could join them, because of course these young women were wrested from their families. So anyway, and privately we're helping this family that arrived this month. But thank you for asking, but for some reason that particular grant, supporting those young women has been the number one for me.
You mentioned some funding some efforts addressing gun violence in the Chicago area. Are you able to share any details about what that involves? And is there any political advocacy connected to that?
Yes, for sure. I can describe it 100%. There's no, actually, I think nothing we do is really secret. I mean, maybe the processes are a little secret, but all of our grants are on our website. So the way we've approached gun violence in Chicago, really for the last close to getting on 10 years, has been something called the Partnership for Safe and Peaceful Communities. And this, a little bit like what I was describing with climate, or other things, we realize even if we used our whole endowment, we probably couldn't solve this issue. But with others, and in a way that hopefully is taking some long-term solutions, some medium-term, some immediate-term ones, we can do it, make a difference. So I think it's about 90 funders at the moment across Chicago. We're seeking to do political advocacy to bring in the city and the state and federal resources as well. The business community has stepped up some to help, and the principal idea has been around community violence interruption. So it turns out that the gist of the gun violence issue in Chicago is that in underinvested communities, the number of people who are likely to commit violence and be the victim of violence is actually relatively small. It's in the single-digit thousands of people, and it is in the most disinvested communities. And some of these young people, and it's typically people in the sort of 17 to 25 range, and the likelihood that I or Chris and I live in the certain parts of the city, we are 1,000 to 1 chance compared to somebody else to be harmed in this way. It's just the difference is so extreme for somebody living in one of the particular communities where this is an issue. So having very large investments in programs that help those who have been affected by gun violence to be community violence interrupters, to be in community and in conversation with other young people, and to provide a combination of things which have been some therapy, as well as job preparation, as well as on-ramps into jobs. This is something that through testing has been shown to work, but in relatively heavy doses in concentrated ways. There is now federal support for this under the current administration. So one of the things that is on the ballot, effectively, if you will, I think that one administration would continue this kind of support, another one would probably not. And this is not trying to politicize it, but it is, as you say, political advocacy is relevant here because the kinds of prevention types of programs that we know work, they're very expensive. But thinking about the fact that if you put somebody in jail, that's very expensive for society too, and much better if we can help provide the kinds of therapy, the kind of job training, the kinds of job on-ramps would be much better to do rather than have the harm occur and have somebody, taken out of the system and then have to provide the support. So that's the core of the strategy. CVI, I think, community violence interruption, does have good data now behind it, showing that it can work. But it is, I will say, of all the things we are working on right now, it is the most sort of Sisyphusian in feel. It's very, very hard to get some traction, but at least we have, I think, a theory of something that can work in the near term. And then it's got to be these longer term investments in communities that have been disinvested. There's just no two ways about it.
Yeah, I'm a veteran of the newspaper industry, so I'm
Thank you.
curious about your funding program. How do you go about doing that? So many of even the newspaper chains now aren't concerned about journalism.
Yeah.
I mean, it's about bottom line. That's all they care about. So, are you talking about setting up like alternative news sources, or funding the existing newspapers to try to get them back to where journalism is important?
So our approach has been to try a bunch of different things because we don't really know the answer. But I'll give you examples of both just to put it on the table. So a couple years ago, when the Tribune was up for sale, or was getting bought basically by Alden Capital, which is a really miserable venture capital firm or hedge fund or whatever they are. And they've been going around buying up newspapers and just taking out all of the cost and firing people, laying people off, whatever that is. The Tribune, which ultimately has been bought by Alden, has gone from, I think, 600 reporters to something like 70 in the newsroom. So, really just taking out the cost, jacking up the prices, and they will leave it for a husk in a few years. It's just, so this came up for sale. A number of us took a look at, could we buy the Tribune, and it just wasn't really possible. But at the same time, the owners of the Sun-Times said, we would be happy to sell the Sun-Times to you for $1, plus give you some money, and allow it to be merged with the big NPR station in Chicago called WBEZ. And so we and a bunch of others, obviously with WBEZ leading this, Chicago Public Media, supported with $60 million over 5 years the effort to merge the Sun-Times and WBEZ, and to say, could you take the best of the NPR station in Chicago and the number 2 newspaper, but the newspaper that has been typically the black and brown people's newspaper, the hardest working newspaper in America, and really invest in the journalism and make it awesome. And like not disinvest, invest. So really take cold hard cash and put it into a newspaper, so you get the fast twitch reporting of a newspaper with the longer form journalism, the audio journalism of NPR, have that become a strong newsroom, and the best newsroom, we hope, in Chicago. So that's an example of trying to invest in existing systems, just in a slightly different way. But we absolutely are investing in pure digital startups. We're investing in organizations that are newer. I'll give an example in Chicago that we've made a grant to, which is Injustice Watch. I don't know if you're familiar with this organization, but at least in Chicago and Cook County, I suspect throughout Illinois, do you elect your judges here? So this is bizarre to me as a law professor and somebody from Massachusetts, electing your judges. Like, who really knows whether you should elect that judge or this judge? And what Injustice Watch does, it's a pure electronic digital service, although they do print out once a year a election guide that you can bring into the polls. But they just rate the judges who are the candidates, and they tell you, did the Bar Association give them a good rating? And they say, have there been sanctions against them in various ways? So they just give you the data. They don't tell you who to vote for. But I think this is so important that somebody out there is helping inform us as voters. I would have no idea how to figure out who to vote for, and I do their little digital thing, and it's on my little app, and I bring it into the polls, and I know who to vote for my judges. So this would be an example of investing in something that didn't exist before, but is really filling a niche for what we need to do to be good citizens that didn't exist, some years before. So I don't know if the right answer is going to be more money to the Sun-Times. Kristen's now on the board of the Sun-Times, so I turned to her. Or it's going more to the Injustice Watches, or it's something that has never existed before but is starting up tomorrow in Carbondale, Illinois, or Marion, Illinois. I don't know, but we're going to invest in all those things, and we're going to see what works.
If one travels to Jupiter, Florida, in Palm Beach County, John D. MacArthur's name is well known.
It is, yeah.
A state park there, which has preserved the original coast of Florida, how it was when the first founders founded. Plus, it seems to me that in his wisdom, John D. made a lot of wise investments in Palm Beach County.
Sure did.
And I'm wondering if you could address any of that. How important was that to his overall success, and what did he have that in mind when he to sort of leave a legacy like this?
It's a beautiful question, yes. So I told only part of the MacArthur story, and there are some very interesting biographies of him. This was a man who, it was a Scots family that came through Canada and into the upper Midwest in the early part of the 20th century. Did not come from money. This was someone, total bootstrap story. He was, among other things, he delivered newspapers as a delivery boy. He sold insurance door to door and so forth. And somehow the guy scraped together $3,000 to buy Bankers Life and Trust, which was a small company, and he grew it into a very big company. And as many wealthy people did, and I should say, John D. MacArthur married his second spouse, was Catherine T. MacArthur, and Catherine MacArthur was effectively his secretary in the business, but they were clearly business partners. You can tell from the story. They were very important partners in this enterprise. Anyway, as they made their money in Bankers Life and Trust, they did what many wealthy families do, which is to invest in real estate with the proceeds from their financial empire. And so they did two things in particular. They bought about 6,000 apartments in New York City. Turned out to be a good idea. And they invested in land in Palm Beach County, Florida. to your point. So the actual money that we have been investing as the foundation is the sale of those apartment buildings. We sold the last of them in New York in 2019. So that's been the corpus of what we now give out in our grants. But along the way, he, as you say, he gave a great deal of very important land to create the state park and beach in Palm Beach County, and left a fair amount of money to organizations in Palm Beach, including the Community Foundation, which is now the Community Foundation of Palm Beach and Martin counties. And over time, we've added to that such that we've given $50 million to that Community Foundation. So it definitely has been a part of his legacy. We once upon a time had an office there because we had holdings, which we did close, but they have been a very important part, I think, of that family's legacy. And one of the communities actually that is focused on by Community Solutions in this ending homelessness is actually West Palm in Florida. So it continues to be a place that we are connected to, even though it's not a big focus of grant making now. But we have this very large commitment to the Community Foundation. But one thing I'm excited about is that one of the Press Forward chapters is in South Florida. So I'm hoping that we can get back there and do some local news investments as well. But thank you for bringing up that part of the legacy.
You've mentioned several times the Press Forward chapters. Can you talk about what a chapter would do? What does the Wyoming chapter or the Palm Beach chapter do? Are they groups that philanthropists belong to, or are they groups that the general community belongs to? What are the chapters like?
Such a good question. Well, I think part of the answer is chapters can be anything you want them to be. We're glad to support a range of them. So there are 30 that exist. We opened it up, I guess, about a year ago, and we very quickly got to 25, and we had to close the applications because there was so much interest in doing it, which was awesome. And we've just added 5. But the applications open periodically. You actually apply through the Miami Foundation, which is where we've put a lot of the money for the program. Once you're approved, you can apply also for a Catalyst grant, which gives you $250,000. That's MacArthur dollars, but they've been traced through Miami Foundation. We're hoping other people will actually give to the Catalyst funds as well. And that would help you get it off the ground. The typical chapter is organized by a community foundation because the idea is to raise and give out money for local news, basically. In Chicago, we have linked up, and I'll just give an example of the Press Forward Chicago chapter. So the core of it is housed at the Chicago Community Trust. It has a director, it has staff. It has now a little over $10 million from us and others. It is giving out that money, and we've done one round of grants to 15 organizations. Actually, Injustice Watch that I just mentioned was one of those grantees. I think we've done basically $100,000 grants, something like that, $100,000 to $200,000 grants. So I think we did about 15 grants, $1.5 million for the grant. So it is a grant-making opportunity in the first instance. But we've also got an advisory group that is active journalists and community members who are advising what we should do. So I think the simple answer would be, if, let's just call it Southern Illinois, but it could be, could be defined in different ways. If a community foundation said, we'd love to do this, you apply, Press Forward anoints, because this is a good idea. And there have been times when multiple people in a community wanted to be the chapter. That's why we have to have a little process. We can give you some money. But then most important of all, we can connect you to other Press Forward chapters, which are creating a network, basically, of people who are trying to revive local news. And the reason I think this is interesting is we all need networks and friends and so forth, and it's fun to come together. All the chapters are coming together. We came together in Chicago recently. We're coming together in Cleveland in a few weeks. Miami will be a place, so if you want Miami in the winter, night media forums, good time to come together as chapters, but really to compare notes. So what is working in Carbondale, Illinois might be really helpful in terms of what's happening in a part of Wyoming, say, or a part of Alaska, or vice versa. And that, I think, is actually where the magic's going to happen, which is if we're figuring out best practices, things that make it sustainable, that we can share that and have people support one another. I think that's the answer. But I would say if you have a really creative idea for what a chapter could look like in Southern Illinois, that'll be really cool, right? For you to come together and say, this is what we want to do as a community. We're not going to come up with that as MacArthur, but we're happy to be supportive if you come up with an idea. And I hope you do.
Thank you. So my grandmother was John's niece.
Oh, no way!
Yes, and she happened to be the chronicler of a lot of family stories, and she passed that down to my mother. So, and her father Alfred was not a fan of John.
Okay.
But if you would like any of those stories after the show,
Absolutely. I'll find you in the back.
Everybody.
I'll find you. For those who know the history, there was a fair amount of litigation in the 1980s about the foundation. So it's public that there was some acrimony.
Yeah, so I don't know if you know a whole lot about their family. Alfred was the oldest and John was the youngest. But anyway, it's interesting. A lot of interesting stories about John and Catherine.
Absolutely.
I'm not going to share in public.
Thank you for that. But I'd love to hear some more. Thank you.
I have a totally unrelated question at the end, but I just wanted to tell you something about Carbondale that related to your favorite grant. So 2.5 years ago, there were 4 sponsor circles in Carbondale that brought in 4 different Afghan families.
Oh, great.
And now all of them are working,
Wow.
and all of them are settled.
Oh my gosh.
And it's been really a good thing.
That's awesome. Thank you. Was it through welcome.us?
Yes.
Oh, that's so great. So that's for those who don't know, it's worth knowing because it's just an amazing thing that there is a mechanism for community members. So I'm a member of the group that is funding this family of 6 to come to the U.S. through this very formal process. It deals with the visas and the arrival and all that kind of stuff. And you put up a certain amount of money. It's mostly for the housing for the first bunch of months, and then you welcome them as they arrive to the U.S. and help kids get in school and help them get a job. And it's kind of an amazing thing.
The unrelated question is, as a grandparent of a 3-year-old in relationship to your book, what's your feeling knowing about the addictive potential of technology and yet the value of technology? Did you come to any kind of conclusion about that?
Did you say 3-year-old?
3-year-old.
Okay. So the reason that I ended up writing this book, Born Digital, was actually because my wife and I were having kids, and it was early on, and her graduate training is in early childhood education, and at that time the theory was that digital technologies are not that great for kids early childhood. Turns out still to be right. And as you may have seen, the American Academy of Pediatrics has guidance that basically says there is no point in baby Einstein and screens at young ages. It doesn't help, and in fact it can be negative. I think that so the book that we wrote after that, called The Connected Parent, has a description of what we think the best science suggests for every age. So I'm happy to send you a copy I've got too many of extras in my house if you want one. But it does go through, kind of what we think the best practices are by age. I do think that one thing that's quite different than when we did the first research 15 years ago is that we have not regulated technology companies and social media companies at all. And we should have, because what they have done is hire psychologist after psychologist to make them more addictive and more negative. And I would not have said this actually in 2007 or 2008 if we were having the same conversation. Kids use way more screens than they did before. The average young person is well over 40 hours a week using a screen, which is more than a full-time job. And the addictive quality of social media is not positive for most kids. There are instances where it can be helpful for kids, and I can get into that. But actually, I think it is now net negative, and I think the Surgeon General is right to identify that. It is most net negative for kids who have other underlying issues, like anxiety, depression, and in particular, the area where there's data is as young girls who have eating disorders. So I can go into the upsetting parts about it, but there's no question that this has become a more negative story, and we should actually have kids spend less time online than we do. And I would not have said that 15 years ago in the same way.
Maybe one more question. Is there one back there?
Next month, I defend my dissertation in education technology.
Wow! Oh my gosh! Congratulations!
And my dissertation is on adult learners in the intersections.
No way! Oh my gosh!
And so my question is regarding your book. Have you talked a lot about adults who are either returning to school or going to school as first gens or first time out of necessity, and they have to engage online technology out of that necessity?
Well, I hope your dissertation will cover that, because we didn't particularly. And you'll have to give me a pointer, if you would, later to where I can find it. One of the things we did look at was the effect of older adults who, some people have had technology in their work lives and others haven't, of course. So what ends up happening is there's much more diversity in terms of the ability of older people based upon their life stage. And so you have some people now, when we think about older people as hapless in this area, who are in their 60s, and they actually develop the technologies. Like, we've got people who have been literally, are better than any of the rest of us who created it. One of the people I talk to regularly is named Vint Cerf. He is one of the founders of the internet for sure. He's well into his 80s, but Vint knows more about this than everybody out in this room, right, added together. And we have people who, as you suggest, have not ever been in the workforce using the technologies, and some have been displaced from their jobs, now have to do that, and we don't focus on the retraining and so forth. And so some of the public policy calls that we make are really thinking about how we provide that kind of access to older adults when we don't design for them, we don't think about them as learners, and in fact we end the book with a chapter on learners, which is in fact really focused on this topic. But I am sure your dissertation is way better on this, and we look forward to calling you doctor when you're done. So, thank you.
Well, why don't we thank you, John, for just a wonderful conversation. You and Kristen for making the trek. I know you're going to be hustling back to Chicago. You have some important meetings on artificial intelligence starting tomorrow and going through the weekend. So, and again, I know the students were overwhelmed by you and just the way you showed interest in their work. The professors, I know several are still here, were deeply impressed, as well as the students, or the friends of WSIU. So thank you so much. We're going to continue to follow your work, both at MacArthur and elsewhere. Look forward to your book, and thank you again so much for coming.
Likewise. Thank you, everybody, very much. Thank you.